I'm sorry, I could not resist using that title. And it so, eloquently fits into my theme of, really my entire YouTube channel, which really seems to be coming into focus this week, because America is in decline. America's been in decline for probably my entire life, looking back. And so, it's not really fair to say the decline and fall of Biden's America, but, right now, he's the guy at the top. He's the figurehead. He is sort of the avatar for the United States worldwide. And I think he's a very fitting one. I also thought that Trump was. They both were, and so was Obama and Bush before that. I think that the presidents that get elected, even the ones that are elected under suspicious circumstances, let's say, because I don't want to get any more videos pulled. I won't go into any more detail than that. They are reflective of sort of the political zeitgeist of their era. The presidents are not are not men of action in the sense that they impose their will on the country and they shape reality to their whims. That's a myth that I always try and smash with people. The president is not some demigod. He's not Gilgamesh up in Ziggurat, just sort of dictating reality down, to the mere mortals. The president of the United States is a product of the population, of the times in which, they live. They're all in their own way in tune with, the national spirit. And as America has become more divided, or I should say, as America's divisions have become more apparent over the years, and as the national spirit has become less and less cohesive, so too, have our presidents. Trump's erratic behavior and style, is an obvious example of this, but I think that Biden's is as well. Biden is not the man he used to be. Biden used to be a very run-of-the-mill, corrupt corporate politician. He was the credit card company's man, as so many people have called him. But these days, he's nothing more than a doddering old fool. He trips and stumbles and, tries quickly to get back up and brush himself off again, because he does have, a lot of residual strength still left in him. But at the end of the day, people recognize that his sun is beginning to set. And so, too, have people, for the last few years, really begun to recognize that the sun is setting on the American empire as a whole. The end of the Cold War was America's greatest triumph, and ever since then, presidents and the establishment in general, the military-industrial complex, whoever you want to point your finger at, hell, even Hollywood, they've squandered that victory. The peace dividend that the United States earned from that victory was never cashed in. Instead, as we all know all too well, the war party decided that it was far more beneficial to have the Cold War going on than to enjoy the peace. They never wanted the Cold War to end. None of them ever expected it to end. They all thought that the Soviet Union was a much more capable foe. In fact, many of them had a very sick admiration for Soviet socialism. I think it's no coincidence that neoconservatives were, all ex-Trotskyites by definition. And so, in the years since 1991, when the Soviet Union officially crumbled, the United States has not been content just trying to, rest on its laurels. It has chosen instead to try and project power wherever possible, just for power's sake. That's how we got the wars in Iraq, the wars in Afghanistan, the wars in all the other countries that nobody ever talks about, like Somalia and Yemen. And these are all examples of the United States stumbling and tripping up the steps because the U.S. was trying to ascend to an even higher plane than they already occupied. Very similarly to the way in which Joe Biden was hurriedly rushing up the steps trying to get into Air Force One earlier today, and he tripped, and then he got up very quickly, didn't want to show any weakness, and so he started running up again, and he tripped, and then he got up very quickly, and then again for a third time, he tripped, and it looked like it hurt to me. I mean, he was not, he was beating himself up. I think he's probably going to be bruised on his shins, and I feel bad for him. But his response again was to brush himself up and to rush up the steps even faster to get to the top, and then salute the troops down on the runway. Well, the United States has been doing that, as I said, since the end of the Cold War, and the wars are the most egregious examples of those missteps. But it's not just been the wars, it's been the bubbles. The housing bubble, is probably the most notable out of those, but also the tech bubble came since the Cold War. The current everything bubble that we're living in now, these are examples of American arrogance, of the United States saying, we can have the fastest growing economy ever and we're never going to have another recession. We're just going to, through the power of fiat, literally by fiat, we are going to print our way to prosperity. And yet time and time again it has ended in disaster, and will ultimately culminate, as I have been, I won't say forecasting, because I would never call myself an economic forecaster. I like being right, I don't like being wrong. But as I've been warning, will happen when we get to the end of this current cycle. The United States will stumble and fall flat on its face. It won't just trip up a little bit like it did at the end of the last two cycles, at the end of the dot-com bust and then the housing bust. We're going to fall face first and never get back up again. Because throughout all this time, as the United States has been trying to prove to the rest of the world that, we're on top, and we're still on top, and we're going to be on top forever. The U.S. has been getting weaker and weaker, just like Joe Biden. If you look at Joe Biden back in 1991, he was a totally different man, even though back then he still had white hair and was bald. And so, I guess where I'm going with all of this is that this week of humiliation in which Russia and China thoroughly, I think, embarrassed Biden and his, and the United States. I think that too many people are just going to blame that on Biden and say, it's because Biden is a doddering old fool. They think they can push him around. He's pathetic. Putin challenged him to a live debate because he knows that Biden can't complete, a sentence off script. He can barely complete a sentence on script, and half the time he can't even do that. This is pathetic. We need, strong leaders, somebody like Trump up there or somebody else who can speak. Somebody who the Russians can't push around. Well, it's not so much that it's not just that Biden's personality or his physical constitution or his mental constitution is weak. Yes, that's true. But the Constitution, and I don't mean the literal document, the Constitution, I mean the regime of the United States is weak as well. That's what China and Russia ultimately are tapping into. Yes, Biden is personally weak and comes across as weak. But if he really had a strong regime behind him, they still would not be able to push him around this way. People are confusing what is the chicken and what is the egg. It's not that you have this clucking hen, Joe Biden, who is weak and feeble, coming in here and laying a rotten egg, which is a weak American regime which is not respected across the globe. Rather, it is the weak American regime which produced the weak and feeble President Joe Biden, which produced him and pushed him up in the ranks to its highest position, which is the source of all this weakness. In a strong regime, a weak old man like Joe Biden would have no place. He would not be around. He would be, he would have been, he'd be in a nursing home somewhere, sitting in a wheelchair with a blanket over his lap. Because a strong regime has capable, youthful, virile individuals who, they can push up to the top of the food chain. And so it's only because America is so weak fundamentally that Joe Biden was able to ascend to the presidency. Something that a lot of people forget is that a government such as the United States is only as strong as its underlying economy and its underlying society. The public sector leeches off of the private sector. The public sector must draw all of its wealth, all of its resources from the private sector. And so if the private sector is not healthy and vibrant, if there's a lot of underbrush, unhealthy growth, vines and things, dead waste, clogging up the private sector of the economy, well, that is going to affect the health of the public sector as well. And as I've discussed ad nauseum on this channel, the U.S. economy has been hollowed out over the past few decades. The U.S. economy is weaker now than it has been in any of our lifetimes. And anyone who is looking at the fiscal situation in the United States can tell that the U.S. is on the verge of collapse at any moment, and that it's, it really can, things can get ugly here very quickly. What is left of the U.S. economy has only survived by being propped up by government spending over the past year, a massive, unprecedented surge in government spending, which was completely financed, through new bond issuance, through debt, and those bonds were, essentially paid for by the Federal Reserve. And I talk about this again and again, and this is not going to be another video about the Fed. I'm not getting into that. But the U.S. is, what, $28 trillion in debt right now? If interest rates continue to move higher, they don't have to get very high at all before the U.S. federal government starts running into problems of solvency. The fact of the matter is that if, as I've been chronicling on this channel, the U.S. trying to replace all domestic production, shutting that down largely, cutting that off, kneecapping so many businesses, putting people on unemployment, and then printing money to give to them to spend on consumer goods, which are imported, is creating this massive bottleneck in shipping to where, there's dollars flowing out of the United States and goods coming in, but there's just, we're importing, so much of what we consume now that there's just, there's a physical limitation on how much can be imported. That is going to lead to, and creates a relative scarcity. It's a problem on the supply side of not enough goods, too much money chasing too few goods. That is leading to this inflation that we're seeing now, that we're starting to see now, which the bond market is trying to price into interest rates. And if interest rates rise because the United States debts, the U.S.'s debt is so concentrated on the short end of the curve, which the Fed has been successful so far in keeping pegged down. The short end of the curve is not moving up like the long end of the curve has. But still, even if there is the long-term U.S. debt, if that keeps rising, the average interest rate that the U.S. is paying every year on its debt is going to continue to rise. This means that even if spending doesn't grow in the U.S., which spending is growing constantly, the U.S. always spends more, never spends less. But even if it stayed the same, the deficit would grow bigger and bigger as the rate of interest, even on the same level of debt, increases. And if deficits keep getting bigger and bigger, the Fed has to print more and more of the federal government's budget in order, for all the checks to cash every year. And this continues to feeding the very inflation that they created to begin with. And so it's a never-ending feedback loop. The Fed prints all this money to try and prop up the U.S. economy, money which is being funneled through the federal government, laundered essentially, and then handed out to consumers, and of course to mostly to the too big to fail types. Consumers are getting peanuts out of the amount of money that's actually being created here. It's not so much a problem that consumers are getting so much money, it's that there's so little production that what money that consumers do have is bidding up prices in the market. But anyway, anyone with two eyes and half a brain can see this. And so the Russians and the Chinese probably are going to have fun poking at the U.S. because they know they're so weak. So that's where we are here. Biden's detractors, like Trump's detractors, like to think that, this is a result of Biden, that people perceive the U.S. to be weak. It's quite the opposite. The reason why someone like Biden was able to get into office is precisely because the U.S. is so weak to begin with. It's the same situation that you had with Trump. Trump and Biden are both symptoms of different problems, but very real problems that the U.S. had before either of them ever got into office. And with that said, I will leave it off there for today.